All right, let's get right into it. This is an absolutely incredible story about a flight that was pushed right to the very edge. Just try to put yourself in the situation for a second. You've been flying for nearly 13 hours. You're finally circling over your destination. You can see the city lights right there, just below you. But you can't land. You're just stuck, trapped. For the 280 souls on Singapore Airlines Flight 319, this wasn't a hypothetical. This was very, very real. And here's the crazy part. What's so fascinating is just how fast their options started disappearing. I mean, every single minute they were stuck up there circling in that storm, they were just burning through fuel. And that fuel gauge was ticking down, pushing them closer and closer to a point where there was no turning back. So that's the big question, right? How does a totally routine 13-hour flight turn into this fight for survival? This wasn't some big, dramatic engine explosion. No, it was a whole cascade of seemingly small problems, bad weather, a few tough calls, that just spiraled and snowballed into a life-or-death situation. To really get it, we've got to rewind and go back to the start. And the thing is, this whole journey started out as normal as it gets. Flight 319 just pushes back from the gate at London Heathrow. It's a calm evening, just another routine flight taking off, one of thousands that day. So you look at the pre-flight briefing, and really, everything looks completely standard. You've got a veteran captain, we're talking over 14,000 hours of experience here. He checks the weather forecast and sees typical Singapore thunderstorms. Nothing to worry about, right? So he makes the call. The standard fuel load is plenty, totally adequate. Plus, they've got multiple alternates nearby in Singapore and Malaysia. It was a textbook, by-the-book decision. But it also ended up being the very first link in a chain of events that almost led to total disaster. Okay, so fast forward nearly 12 hours. They're starting their descent into Singapore. And, well, the situation on the ground has changed a lot. Those typical thunderstorms they planned for, yeah, they had turned into something way, way worse. Something far more violent and unpredictable. And listen to how fast things just completely fell apart. First, the wind just flips on them. Bam! Their easy straight-in approach, not happening. Then, this torrential rain comes down and visibility drops to almost nothing. Then, and you're not going to believe this, the wind flips again, making the new runway totally unsafe. And that was it. The final blow comes from air traffic control. Singapore's Changi Airport is closed, period. Flight 319 is now stuck, forced into a holding pattern, just circling. Now, keep in mind, these pilots were not cutting corners. They started with a really healthy fuel margin. The plan was to land with 7,000 kilograms of fuel left over. That's more than double what the law requires. They had a buffer, It was designed for exactly this kind of situation. The problem is, when you're holding at a low altitude like they were, you burn through fuel so much faster. And this one number, this critical number, starts to loom very, very large. See, this final reserve fuel, it's the absolute rock bottom minimum you're allowed to land with. It's not for circling around, waiting for weather to clear, it's for emergencies. And as their buffer just evaporated, they knew they had to find a place to land. And they had to find it now. So Singapore is a no-go. Their other alternates also getting slammed by the storm. So the crew looks at the map and finds their only real option left, a nearby Indonesian island called Batam. But just getting permission to go there was a whole other problem. You've got to be kidding me, right? They're stuck in holding patterns, dealing with administrative delays, just trying to get approval to land in a different country, all while their fuel is just disappearing. Finally, their fuel situation becomes critical. That safety buffer? Gone. They had absolutely no choice left but to declare a full-blown emergency, saying the words no pilot ever wants to say, Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Fuel. Okay, so the Mayday call works. It gets them a direct, immediate clearance to land at Batam. But their nightmare? Oh, it was just getting started. Because that same violent, unpredictable storm system that shut down Singapore, well, it was now moving over their one and only escape route. And right away, they hit their first big challenge, the equipment at Batam. The runway they needed to use only had what's called a VOR approach. Now, unlike a modern ILS, which is like a high-tech beam that guides the plane both left and right and up and down, this VOR is older tech. It only gives them side-to-side guidance. The up and down part, that was all on the pilots to handle manually. In the middle of a raging storm. The pressure was on. So they're on their first attempt, they're trying to get lined up, and the weather just turns on them again. Out of nowhere, this massive, powerful tailwind just slams into the airplane. We're talking way, way beyond the safety limits for a landing. The captain had zero choice. He had to jam the throttles to full power and go around, climbing right back up into that horrible storm. And all the while, burning more and more of that precious, dwindling fuel. Can you even imagine the pressure inside that cockpit? Just immense. All right, attempt number 2. They switched to the opposite runway. And the good news is, this one has a full ILS system, but time is their enemy now. The captain, trying to save every drop of fuel, attempts this rushed, really tight turn to get lined up faster. But it backfires. It puts the plane in a terrible position for the approach. So when he goes to engage the autoland system, nope, a warning just flashes on the screen. The whole approach is completely unstable. Think about this. They are just 130 feet off the ground. That is seconds away from touching down. And he has to go around again. So that's 2 tries, 2 failures. And that fuel gauge, it's scraping empty. Now, on the 3rd try, you can just feel the stress. It's got to be showing. They pop out of the clouds, but they're way too high and off to the left of the runway. The captain just shoves the nose down, trying to force the plane onto the runway in a steep dive. But that triggers the plane's own safety system, and you get that terrifying automated voice screaming, "Sink rate! Sink rate!" I mean, what a horrible choice to have to make. Ignore the warning and maybe crash right there, or go around a 3rd time and almost certainly run out of fuel in the air. He did what he was trained to do. He aborted the landing, a 3rd go-around, knowing exactly what that meant for their fuel. And that was it. Game over for standard procedures. There was simply not enough fuel left to go around and try another normal approach. The engines could flame out at any moment. They were effectively a 100-ton glider with 280 people's lives hanging in the balance. So in this moment of just pure desperation, but also incredible airmanship, the captain does something you would never, ever see in a passenger jet. He basically threw the rulebook out the window. He pulls this super tight, descending 180-degree turn to swing the plane around and give them one last desperate visual shot at that runway. This was it, the final chance. And he did it. He actually made it. He wrestled that massive jet through the wind and planted it down hard on the runway. After almost an hour of pure terror over Batam, they were on the ground, safe. With so little fuel left, they could barely even taxi to the gate. So this absolutely harrowing experience, a story that came so close to being a tragedy, it didn't just become a forgotten footnote. No, it actually sparked some really crucial changes in safety. You know, Singapore Airlines didn't just wipe their brows and say, "Phew, glad that's over." They took this terrifying close call and used it to make their entire operation safer. They brought in stricter rules for fuel and when to divert. And, I think this is the most important part, they created a brand new mandatory simulator exercise that forces every single one of their pilots to live through the exact same nightmare scenario that the crew of Flight 319 somehow survived. It just makes you think, doesn't it? How razor thin is that line between a completely routine flight and an absolute catastrophe? And how much of it all comes down to those last critical decisions made under impossible pressure in the cockpit? This story could have so easily ended in tragedy, but instead, because of the skill and the final desperate choices made by that crew, it became this powerful lesson in survival, a story written at the very edge of what's possible in the sky.